Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Catherine Dunmore, but everyone calls me Kate. I've been a ranger for 16 years now, and in all that time I thought I'd seen everything the mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. It was March of 1991, and I was driving my truck through the Jefferson National Forest near the Virginia-West Virginia border. The radio crackled with reports of methane gas building up in the old Black Rock mine. That mine had been closed since the 1920s, but gas can still leak from those deep tunnels even after all these years. I pulled up to the old mining town around noon. The place was like a ghost town. Broken windows, rusted equipment, and weeds growing through the wooden sidewalks. Most folks had left when the mine closed, but a few families still lived in the old company houses. Mrs. Henderson came out of her house when she heard my truck. She was maybe 70, with gray hair pulled back tight and worry lines around her eyes. "You hear about the gas?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. We got reports of methane leaking from the old shafts. I need to check it out and make sure everyone's safe." She nodded, but something in her face made me pause. "Something else bothering you, Mrs. Henderson?" She looked toward the mine entrance, a dark hole cut into the hillside about half a mile away. "My husband worked that mine before it closed. Lost a lot of good men down there over the years. I heard about the explosion in 1923, terrible thing." "That's just it," she said, lowering her voice. "Folks around here, we always said those men never really left the mountain. Sometimes at night you can still hear the sound of pickaxes working down in the tunnels." I'd heard stories like this before. Mining towns are full of ghost stories, and I understood why. When good people die in terrible ways, families need something to hold on to. But I'm a practical woman. I studied mining engineering before I became a ranger, and I know that old mines make all kinds of sounds as they settle and shift. "Well, I'll make sure everything's safe," I told her. "You folks just stay inside until I give the all clear." I got my equipment from the truck: gas detector, safety rope, helmet with a good light, and my radio. I'd inspected over 150 abandoned mines in my career. Most of the time it was routine work, checking for dangerous gas buildup or weak support beams. But as I walked toward that black hole in the mountain, something felt different. The air was too still. No birds singing, no insects buzzing. Even the wind seemed to avoid this place. I checked my gas detector, normal readings so far, but my skin felt prickly, like before a bad thunderstorm. The mine entrance was bigger than most, tall enough for a man to walk through without ducking. Old wooden support beams held up the rocky ceiling, and rusty train tracks disappeared into the darkness. I clicked on my headlamp, and the beam cut through the black like a knife. That's when my radio buzzed. It was headquarters in Richmond. "Kate, we've got a problem. We sent a geological survey team into that area yesterday to check the mine system. They were supposed to report back this morning, but we haven't heard from them." My stomach dropped. "How many people?" "4. They had all the right equipment and plenty of experience, but their emergency beacon just activated from somewhere deep in the mine system, much deeper than they should have gone." I stared into that dark tunnel. 4 people were down there somewhere, and something had gone wrong. The methane leak was bad enough, but now I had a rescue mission on my hands. "I'm going in," I said into the radio. "Kate, wait for backup. We're sending a full rescue team. That'll take 4 hours. If there's a gas pocket down there, those people might not have 4 hours." I said, lipped the radio to my belt, and checked my equipment one more time. My father had died in a mine accident when I was 22, a cave-in that could have been prevented if the mining company had spent money on proper safety supports instead of cutting corners. That's why I became a ranger, to keep people safe in places like this. But as I stepped into that tunnel, with the mountain closing around me and my light pushing back the darkness, I felt something I'd never felt before in all my years underground. I felt watched. The tunnel sloped downward, following the old coal seam. My footsteps echoed off the stone walls, and water dripped somewhere in the distance. The wooden support beams looked older than they should, worn smooth by decades of miners' hands. Some had names carved into them: Jimmy, 1922, and For Mary, Love Always. I'd gone maybe 200 yards when I heard it, a sound that made me stop dead in my tracks. Tap, tap, tap. It was the sound of a pickaxe hitting stone coming from somewhere deeper in the mine. But that was impossible. This mine had been sealed for 70 years, and I was the only living person down here. Wasn't I? I stood in that tunnel for a full minute, listening. The tapping sound came again, rhythmic, steady, like someone working at the coalface. My gas detector was still reading normal, but my hands started shaking anyway. I keyed my radio. "Headquarters, I'm hearing sounds of mining activity down here. Could be the survey team, but it doesn't make sense. They wouldn't be working without checking in." Static answered me. The mountain was interfering with the signal. I kept moving deeper, following the main tunnel. The tapping got louder, and I started hearing other sounds too. The scrape of shovels on stone, the creak of wooden mine carts, and underneath it all, something that raised the hair on my neck: men singing. It was an old mining song, something my father used to hum. "Down in the mine where the sun don't shine, working for the company till the end of time." The voices were faint but clear, echoey, hung through the stone. Multiple men, singing together like miners used to do to keep their spirits up during long shifts underground. I rounded a bend in the tunnel and stopped. My light hit something that shouldn't exist. A mine cart sat on the tracks, half filled with fresh coal. The metal looked new, not rusted like it should after 70 years. Steam rose from the coal like it had just been dug from the earth. I walked closer, my boots crunching on loose stone. The cart was real. I could touch it, smell the sharp scent of fresh coal dust. But how could this be here? That's when I noticed my headlamp was getting dimmer. The battery was brand new that morning, but the light was fading fast. I tapped it with my hand, and it flickered, throwing crazy shadows on the tunnel walls. The singing stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something else. Footsteps. Not coming toward me, but moving parallel to my position, like someone walking in a tunnel that ran alongside this one. But according to the mine maps I'd studied, there was no tunnel there. "Hello?" I called out. "This is Ranger Dunmore with the Forest Service. If anyone's down here, please respond." The footsteps stopped. Then I heard a voice, distant but clear. "Who's that walking in our mine?" The accent was old-fashioned, like people from the mountains talked decades ago, and the question didn't make sense. If it was the survey team, they'd know I was coming to help them. I checked my compass. It was spinning wildly, the needle swinging back and forth like it couldn't find magnetic north. That happens sometimes in deep mines, but not usually this close to the entrance. I kept walking, following the tracks deeper into the mountain. The tunnel branched several times, but I stayed on the main line, marking my path with chalk on the support beams like I'd been trained. After another 100 yards, I found something. Gee, that made my blood run cold. 4 hard hats sat in a neat row on a wooden bench. Modern hard hats with battery packs and LED lights, not the old carbide lamps miners used in the 1920s. These had to belong to the survey team, but why would they take off their safety equipment in an active mine? I picked up one of the hats. The name Rodriguez was written in black marker on the back. The LED light was still on, casting a bright white beam. If their lights were working, why was mine failing? That's when I heard the singing again, louder now. And it wasn't coming from ahead of me. It was coming from behind. I spun around, my failing headlamp throwing weak yellow light down the tunnel I'd just walked through. Nothing there. But the voices were clear. 16 tons, and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. This wasn't the same song as before, and there had to be at least a dozen men singing, their voices bouncing off the stone walls and filling the tunnel with sound. I grabbed one of the survey team's hard hats and strapped it on. The LED light was bright and steady, cutting through the darkness like my old lamp never could. But in that white light, I saw something that made my knees go weak. Footprints in the coal dust, lots of them. But they weren't modern boot prints like the survey team would make. These were the prints of old-fashioned work boots, the kind with heavy soles and metal cleats that miners wore in the 1920s. The prints were everywhere, leading in all directions through the tunnel system. And they looked fresh. I followed the newest set, the ones that looked like they'd been made just hours ago. They led me deeper into the mine, past empty rooms where coal had been stripped from the walls decades ago. The singing got louder with every step. Then the prints just stopped. I stood there in the bright LED light, staring at the ground. The footprints ended at a solid wall of stone. No tunnel, no opening, nothing. It was like whoever made them had walked straight into the rock and disappeared. That's when my radio crackled. "Ed to life. Kate, come in. This is the rescue team. We're at the mine entrance. What's your status?" I'd never been so happy to hear another human voice. "I'm maybe half a mile in, following the main tunnel. I found the survey team's equipment, but no sign of the team itself, and there's something very wrong down here." "What do you mean, wrong?" I looked around at the impossible footprints and listened to the ghostly singing that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "I think we need to get everyone out of this mountain. Right now." Static filled my radio for a long moment. Then, "Kate, we're coming in. Stay where you are and wait for backup." But as I stood there in that tunnel, surrounded by the voices of men who should have been dead for 70 years, I knew waiting wasn't an option. Somewhere in this maze of stone and shadow, 4 people were in terrible danger. And I was about to find out just how terrible. The rescue team took 40 minutes to reach me. By the time I saw their lights coming down the main tunnel, I'd heard enough impossible things to fill a nightmare. The singing never stopped. Sometimes it was work songs, sometimes hymns, sometimes just wordless humming that seemed to come from inside the mountain itself. And the sounds of mining, pickaxes, shovels, wooden carts rolling on metal rails, continued non-stop, always just around the next corner or through the next wall. "Jesus, Kate, you look like you've seen a ghost," said Tommy Chen, the rescue team leader. He'd worked with me on 3 other mine rescues, and I'd never seen him rattled by anything. "Maybe I have," I said, and I meant it. There were 5 men on the rescue team, all experienced with underground work. They had modern equipment, powerful lights, gas detectors, rope systems, and communication gear that could punch a signal through solid rock. "Show us what you found," Tommy said. I led them to the bench where the survey team's hard hats were lined up. The men looked at each other with the kind of worry that comes from years of dangerous work. "This doesn't make sense," said Jake Morrison, a cave rescue specialist. "No miner takes off his hat in an active tunnel. It's like taking off your seatbelt in a moving car." "There's more," I said. I showed them the footprints, the impossible coal cart, the places where the sounds seemed loudest. With each discovery, their faces got more serious. "Could be a gas leak affecting our judgment," suggested Pete Williams, the team's medic. "Sometimes methane can cause hallucinations." But their gas detectors showed the same readings as mine, well within safe limits. We split up to cover more ground, staying in radio contact. Tommy and Jake went down the north tunnel. Pete and the other 2 men checked the south branch, and I continued along the main line where I'd been tracking the missing survey team. That's when things got really bad. I was maybe 200 yards from the others when I heard Tommy's voice on the radio, tight with panic. "Kate, you need to get down here right now. We found something." I ran through the tunnels, following their light beams. They were in a side chamber I'd missed before, a room carved out of the coal seam with wooden support posts holding up the ceiling. In the middle of the room, 4 people sat on the ground with their backs against the wall. At first I thought they were asleep. Then I got closer. They were the survey team, 3 men and 1 woman, all wearing their work clothes and carrying their geological equipment. Their eyes were open, staring straight ahead, and they were completely still. "Are they?" I started to ask. "They're alive," Tommy said, but his voice was strange. "Watch this." He walked over to the closest man, Rodriguez, according to his name tag. and waved his hand in front of his face. No reaction. "It's like they're in some kind of trance," Jake said. "Look at their hands." I looked. Each of the 4 people was holding something. Rodriguez had a pickaxe, the woman held a shovel, and the other 2 men gripped what looked like old mining tools. Their hands were moving slightly, like they were working, but there was nothing to work on. "How long do you think they've been like this?" I asked. Before anyone could answer, Pete's voice crackled over the radio from the south tunnel. "We've got a problem down here, a big problem. You guys need to see this." We left Jake with the survey team and followed the radio signal deeper into the mine. Pete and his 2 partners were in a huge underground chamber, bigger than any room should exist in a coal mine. Their lights couldn't reach the far walls. "This room isn't on any of the mine maps," Pete said. "And look at this." He pointed his light at the floor. The chamber was full of mining equipment. Dozens of pickaxes, shovels, and hand tools arranged in neat rows. But the tools looked old, like they'd been made in the 1920s. "That's not the weird part," said Danny Kowalski, one of Pete's partners. "Watch this." He picked up one of the pickaxes. As soon as his fingers touched the handle, the tool started to glow with a faint blue light. Danny dropped it like it was on fire, and the glow faded. "Every tool in here does that," Pete said. "It's like they're waiting for someone to use them." That's when we heard the new sound. Not singing this time, but voices talking. Clear as day, coming from somewhere deeper in the chamber. "Shift change in 10 minutes. Did you finish working seam 7? Foreman says we need to get the coal cars loaded before supper." The voices had that same old-fashioned accent I'd heard before, and they were getting louder, like people walking toward us. "Everyone stay calm," Tommy said, but I could hear the fear in his voice. "There has to be an explanation." The explanation came walking out of the darkness. At first I thought it was as just another rescue team coming from a tunnel we hadn't found yet. I saw lights bobbing in the distance and heard the sound of heavy boots on stone. Then the lights got closer, and I realized they weren't electric lights at all. They were the yellow flames of old carbide lamps, the kind miners used before battery-powered headlamps were invented. And the men carrying them, God help me, the men carrying them were transparent. I could see through them like looking through dirty water. But they were solid, too, their boots making real noise on the ground, their voices clear and strong. They wore old mining clothes, canvas pants, thick shirts, and heavy coats covered in coal dust. Some carried lunch pails, others had tools over their shoulders. They walked right past us like we weren't there. "Jesus Christ," Danny whispered. One of the ghost miners stopped and turned toward us. He was a big man with a thick mustache and arms like tree trunks. His face was serious but not unfriendly. "You boys lost?" he asked in that old mountain accent. "This here's a working mine. Dangerous for folks who don't know the tunnels." Tommy tried to answer, but no words came out. The ghost miner looked at each of us, his eyes stopping on me. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be down here at all. No place for a lady, especially during shift change." "Shift change?" I managed to say. "Night crew coming on, day crew going home. Been the same for near 70 years now." He paused, tilting his head like he was listening to something. Though I got to say, time gets a bit fuzzy down here in the deep dark. More ghost miners walked past us, maybe 20 or 30 men. Some nodded politely, others were too focused on their work to notice us. They all looked real as life, except for that strange transparency that let me see the stone wall behind them. "Sir," I said to the big miner, "there are people missing down here, 4 geologists. Have you seen them?" He smiled, and for a moment he looked almost solid. "Oh, they're not missing, ma'am. They're part of the crew now. Good workers, too, once. They learned the rhythm of the mountain." The ghost miners kept walking, disappearing into tunnels I couldn't see. Their lights faded, but I could still hear their voices echoing through the stone. "Down in the mine, where the sun don't shine, working for the company till the end of time." Tommy grabbed my arm. "Kate, we need to get out of here. Now." But as we turned to leave, I heard something that made my heart stop. A new voice had joined the ghostly chorus, singing along with the miners' song. It was Rodriguez from the survey team, still sitting in that side chamber, still staring at nothing, but singing the old mining songs like he'd been doing it all his life. That's when I understood the terrible truth about the Black Rock mine. It didn't just kill people, it kept them. We ran through those tunnels like the devil himself was chasing us. But the mountain had other plans. Halfway back to the entrance, the tunnel just ended. Where there had been an open passage 20 minutes earlier, now there was solid rock, like the mine had healed itself while we weren't looking. "This is impossible," Tommy said, running his hands over the stone wall. "We came through here. I marked it myself." He was right. His chalk mark was still there on a support beam, but the tunnel beyond had vanished. Pete keyed his radio. "Base camp, come in. We need immediate assistance." Static. The radios that had been working fine were now completely dead. "The whole mountain's turned against us," Danny said, and I could hear the panic in his voice. I closed my eyes and tried to think. I'd spent 16 years learning about mines, studying how they were built and how they failed. There had to be a way out. That's when I heard footsteps behind us. We turned, and the big ghost miner was standing there, his carbide lamp casting dancing shadows on the walls. "You folks seem to be having trouble," Danny said. "The tunnel's gone," I told him. "We need to get to the surface." He nodded slowly. "Mountain decides who leaves and who stays. Been that way since the explosion." "What? Explosion?" Tommy asked. The ghost miner's face went hard. "March 15th, 1923. Company knew there was gas in the deep seams, but they sent us down anyway. Had to meet the coal quota, they said. Profit's more important than safety." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold underground air. 200 men died. 206, he corrected. "And we've been working ever since. Can't leave, you see. The mountain won't let us go until the job's finished." "What job?" I asked. He smiled, but there was sadness in it. "Protecting the mountain, making sure no more men die for some rich company's greed. Every person who comes down here with the wrong intentions, well, they join the crew." The terrible truth hit me like a cave-in. "The survey team, they weren't just exploring, were they?" "Nope. They worked for Consolidated Mining. Same company that killed us, just with a different name now. They came down here looking for new coal seams to open. Wanted to start mining again." Tommy looked confused. "But they were geologists, doing environmental surveys." The ghost miner laughed, a sound like coal falling down a chute. "Boy, you're more innocent than a newborn calf. Those environmental surveys were really looking for the richest coal deposits. Company's got plans to strip mine this whole mountain." I thought about Rodriguez and the others, sitting in that chamber holding mining tools, their minds trapped in an endless work shift. That's why they can't leave. The mountain thinks they're here to exploit it. "Smart lady," the ghost miner said. "Mountain's got a long memory and a strong sense of justice, but it can't tell the difference between the company men and folks who are just trying to help." As if to prove his point, the tunnel behind us started to rumble. I could hear rocks falling somewhere in the distance, and the wooden support beams creaked under the strain. "It's trying to seal us in too," Pete said. "Maybe," the ghost miner replied. "Or maybe it's just testing you. Mountain needs to know whose side you're on." I stepped forward. My father had died because a mining company cut corners on safety. I became a ranger to prevent tragedies like the 1923 explosion from happening again. If the mountain wanted to know whose side I was on, I'd show it. "I'm here to protect people," I said to the darkness around us. "I'm here to keep the mountain safe from anyone who'd hurt it for money. And I'm here to make sure the men who died in 1923 get the justice they deserve." The rumbling stopped. In the sudden quiet, I could hear the distant sound of miners singing, but it was different now, peaceful, almost happy. The ghost miner nodded. "Mountain hears you. Question is, what are you willing to do about it?" I knew what he meant. The survey team was trapped because they represented everything the dead miners had died fighting. Corporate greed putting profits before human lives. But they were still people, Still someone's family. Tell me how to free them, I said. Can't be done easy, the ghost miner replied. They came here with the wrong intentions, so the mountain bound them to us. Only way to break that binding is to finish what we started 70 years ago. What do you mean? He pointed deeper into the mine toward passages I couldn't see. Company sealed us in when the explosion happened. Left us to die rather than spend money on rescue operations. Our bodies are still down there, in the deep tunnels where the gas caught fire. Tommy looked sick. You want us to go down there? Not just go, the ghost miner said. Give us a proper burial. Mark what really happened here so the world knows the truth. Company covered it up, said it was an accident that couldn't be prevented, but we know better. I thought about Mrs. Henderson and her stories about miners who never left the mountain. I thought about my father, crushed by falling rocks because the company wouldn't pay for proper safety equipment. I thought about Rodriguez and the survey team, their minds trapped in an endless nightmare of forced labor. If I do this, I said, will you let everyone go? The survey team and my rescue team? The ghost miner was quiet for a long moment. Around us, the voices of 200 dead men rose and fell like wind through the tunnels. Do this right, he finally said, and we can all go home. The passage ahead of us opened like a mouth in the mountain. Beyond it lay the deepest parts of the mine, where gas and flame had killed 200 men in a single terrible moment. But it was also the only way to save 4 people who were still alive, and to give justice to 200 who had been forgotten. I looked at Tommy and the others. They were scared. Hell, I was scared. But they were rangers and rescue workers. We'd all sworn to protect people, no matter the cost. Let's go bring them home, I said. The ghost miner smiled, and for just a moment he looked completely solid, completely alive. Follow the rails, he said, and mind the gas pockets. Wouldn't want history to repeat itself. We walked into the deepest darkness I'd ever seen, following the ghost of a man who'd been dead for 70 years, carrying the hopes of everyone who'd ever worked in the dangerous heart of the mountain. Behind us, the tunnel sealed itself shut with the finality of a tomb. The deep tunnels were worse than anything I'd imagined. The air was thick and hard to breathe, and our lights seemed to push against the darkness like it was something solid. But the ghost miners were with us, their carbide lamps showing us safe passages through areas where the ceiling had collapsed or gas had collected in deadly pockets. We found them in the furthest chamber, 206 men, exactly as they'd died 70 years ago. The explosion had been instant. They looked like they'd just laid down for a nap, except for the coal dust and the way the gas had preserved them in the cold, dry air. It took us 6 hours to do what should have been done in 1923. We marked each man's location, recorded their names from the metal tags they wore, and documented how the company's negligence had caused their deaths. Tommy had a camera, and we photographed everything, evidence that would finally tell the truth about the Black Rock mine disaster. When we finished, something changed in the mountain. The air felt lighter, and the oppressive weight that had been pressing down on us since we entered the mine seemed to lift. The ghost miner appeared one last time as we prepared to leave. Thank you, he said simply. 70 years is a long shift, even for coal miners. What happens now? I asked. He looked around at the tunnels that had been his prison and workplace for 7 decades. Now we get to go home, see our families, rest. The other ghost miners gathered around us, men I'd been terrified of just hours before. They looked different now, peaceful, grateful, ready for whatever came next. The folks you came to save are waiting by the entrance, the ghost miner told us. Mountain released them when you started your work down here. They'll be confused and scared, but they'll be themselves again. He started to fade, becoming transparent like smoke in the lamplight. One more thing, he said. Tell people what really happened here. Don't let the company bury the truth again. Then he was gone, and all the ghost miners with him. For the first time since I'd entered the mine, the tunnels were truly empty of everything except the living. We found Rodriguez and the survey team exactly where the ghost miners said they'd be, sitting by the mine entrance, blinking in the daylight like people waking up from a long sleep. They remembered entering the mine for their geological survey, but writhing after that was fuzzy. I never told them the real reason they'd been trapped. Some truths are too heavy for people to carry. The official report blamed the incident on a gas leak that caused temporary disorientation. The mine was permanently sealed with concrete and steel, declared too dangerous for any future use. The geological survey Rodriguez's team had been conducting was quietly canceled, but I kept copies of all our photographs and documentation from the deep tunnels. 6 months later, I sent them to a historian at the State University who specialized in mining disasters. Her research paper, The Truth About Black Rock, Corporate Negligence and the 1923 Mining Tragedy, was published the following year. Consolidated Mining tried to sue the university to suppress the paper. They lost. The families of the 206 men who died finally learned what really happened to their ancestors. Mrs. Henderson lived for 3 more years after the mine was sealed. In all that time, she never again heard the sound of pickaxes working in the deep tunnels. The mountain was quiet at last. I still work as a ranger, but I've never gone into another abandoned mine without thinking about what we found in Black Rock. There are dozens of old mines throughout Appalachia, places where men died in explosions, cave-ins, and gas leaks because companies valued profits more than human lives. Sometimes, when I'm driving through mining country on quiet nights, I wonder if there are other places like Black Rock. Other mountains with long memories and strong senses of justice. Other crews still working shifts that should have ended decades ago. The thought doesn't scare me anymore. If anything, it gives me comfort to know that some wrongs eventually get made right, even if it takes 70 years. But I always carry extra batteries for my headlamp now, just in case. End of story. 4,147 words, approximately 15 minutes reading time. My name is Eleanor Hartwell, and I've been a forest ranger for 11 years. People think it's a quiet job, watching trees all day. They don't know about the fire seasons, when one spark can burn down half a mountain. They don't know about the long nights alone in a tower, watching for smoke that could mean death for whole towns below. I work Shadow Mountain in the Shenandoah Valley, 20 miles from the nearest ranger station, 40 miles from any real town. Just me, my radio, and a steel tower that sways in the wind like a giant's finger pointing at the sky. I used to teach 3rd grade before this. 8 years of sticky fingers and crayon marks and little voices asking, "Miss Hartwell, can I go to the bathroom?" every 5 minutes. After my divorce, I needed something different, something quiet, something where I could think. The kids always sang during recess. Ring Around the Rosie was their favorite. Funny how memory works. I can still hear their voices, all sweet and high, falling down at the end with giggles. June 1983 was the driest summer anyone could remember. The creek beds turned to dust. Pine needles cracked under your feet like broken glass. Every morning the fire danger signs pointed to red, extreme risk. Every day felt like holding your breath, waiting for disaster. My tower sits on Shadow Mountain's highest peak. Locals call it that because even on sunny days, something about the mountain makes shadows where there shouldn't be any. Dark patches that move when no clouds pass overhead. I figured it was just the way the rocks sit, the way light hits the ridges. The tower is 70 feet tall, steel beams and a glass room at the top with windows all around. During the day, I scan the horizon with binoculars, looking for that first wisp of smoke. At night, I sleep in the small cabin at the base, listening to the radio chatter from other towers, other angers keeping watch. Fire season teaches you what real isolation means. Days go by without seeing another person. Your voice gets rusty from not talking. You start talking to yourself just to hear something. The silence gets so thick you feel like you could cut it with a knife. I'd spotted 47 fires in my 11 seasons, had the fastest response time in the district. Fires don't wait for you to think about them. You see smoke, you call it in, you track where it's going. Lives depend on how fast you move. But this June was different. Too quiet. Not just human quiet. Nature quiet. No birds singing at dawn. No insects buzzing in the heat. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The mountain felt like it was waiting for something. The locals in town always had stories about Shadow Mountain. Ghost tales, mostly. Said children died up here long ago in a fire at some old schoolhouse. Said you could still hear them playing on certain nights. I never paid attention to that kind of talk. Thought they were just trying to scare the city girl who came to live in their mountains. I should have listened. The communication equipment in my tower connected me to 6 other stations across the valley. Every hour, I checked in. Shadow Mountain, all clear. Same words, same routine, day after day. The radio was my lifeline, my connection to the world below. 3 days into that terrible June heat wave, my radio started picking up something new. Not the usual chatter from other rangers. Something else. Children singing. The singing started on a Tuesday morning. I was doing my 7 a.m. check, scanning the horizon with binoculars, when I heard it through the radio static. Faint, but clear enough to make out the words. Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. I twisted the radio dial, thinking I'd picked up some distant station, maybe a show. Wool somewhere, kids playing. But the signal was local, coming from somewhere on my mountain. My stomach did a little flip. Were there people up here I didn't know about? Base station. This is Shadow Mountain, I called into my radio. Are you showing any camping permits for my sector? Negative, Eleanor, you should be alone up there. Why? I listened for the singing again. Nothing but static. Just checking. Thought I heard something. Roger that. Stay alert. Weather Service is calling for more dry heat today. The binoculars felt heavy in my hands as I scanned the mountainside below. Nothing moved except heat waves rising from the rocks. No tents, no people, no sign of where children might be playing. But the song stuck in my head, playing over and over. By noon, the temperature hit 95 degrees. No clouds anywhere. The kind of day that makes rangers wake up at night in a cold sweat, dreaming of fire. I ate a sandwich and drank warm water from my thermos, trying to shake the feeling that something was watching me. That's when I heard them again. Clearer this time, like they were right below my tower. London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. I grabbed the binoculars and looked straight down. Nothing. Just the small cabin at the base of my tower, and beyond that, empty forest stretching to the valley floor. The singing seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. My hands shook as I adjusted the radio. Base station Shadow Mountain here. I'm picking up voices on my radio. Children singing. Can you trace the signal? Stand by, Eleanor. The singing stopped. Dead silence for 10 minutes. Then, Shadow Mountain, we're not showing any radio activity in your area except yours. Could be atmospheric interference. Hot weather sometimes bounces signals around. That made sense. Sort of. Radio waves do strange things in heat waves. I'd heard of people picking up stations from hundreds of miles away during certain weather conditions. Still, something felt wrong about it. Around 3 p.m. I found the foundation. I was doing a ground patrol around the tower base, checking for fire hazards when I saw them. Old stones arranged in a rectangle about 50 feet into the tree line. Someone had built something here long ago. The stones were blackened, like they'd been in a fire. I kicked away some pine needles and found more stones. A doorway shape. Window frames. This had been a building once, maybe 20 feet by 30 feet. Big enough for a schoolhouse. The local ghost stories came back to me. Children dying in a fire. Maybe this was the place. I knelt down and touched the blackened stones. They felt warm, warmer than they should in the shade of the trees. Eleanor, what are you doing? I spun around, heart hammering. The voice came from my radio, clipped to my belt. Base station was calling. Just checking the area around my tower, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Roger, we're sending a maintenance crew up tomorrow to check your equipment. Been getting some strange readings from your station. What kind of readings? Temperature spikes. Your weather instruments are showing heat levels that don't match anywhere else in the valley. Probably a malfunction, but we need to check it out. I looked at the blackened stones again. They seemed to pulse with heat, like coals in a dying fire. Copy that. I'll be here. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I dozed off, I heard the singing. Not from the radio this time, from outside, drifting through the trees like mist. Children's voices, happy and playing, singing the old songs I remembered from my teaching days. Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? I got up and looked out the cabin window. Moonlight turned the forest silver and black. Shadows moved between the trees, small shadows, child-sized. Or maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The air felt thick and warm like brar, eating through wool. No wind at all. Even the night insects had gone quiet. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" The singing stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something else. Footsteps, small feet running through dry leaves, getting closer. I pointed my flashlight toward the sound, but the beam seemed to get swallowed up by the darkness, like the light couldn't travel as far as it should. The footsteps circled my cabin, round and round like children playing a game, but I couldn't see anyone in my flashlight beam, just empty forest and those moving shadows that might have been my imagination. I went back inside and locked the door. Tried the radio, but got nothing except static. Even the weather instruments inside my cabin showed impossible readings. Temperature 90 degrees at midnight, humidity near zero, barometric pressure dropping like a stone. Something was very wrong on Shadow Mountain. The maintenance crew was supposed to arrive at 10 a.m. By noon, they still hadn't shown up. I tried calling base station, but my radio only gave me static. Not the normal static. This was different. Underneath the white noise, I could hear whispers, voices too faint to understand, but definitely there. The day was even hotter than before. My thermometer read 103 degrees in the shade. The air shimmered like water everywhere I looked. Pine trees drooped their branches like they were melting. And still no wind, no clouds, no relief from the burning sun. I climbed up to the tower room and scanned the access road with binoculars. The road twisted down the mountainside for 3 miles before disappearing into the valley. No vehicles anywhere. No dust clouds from approaching trucks. That's when I saw the children. At first I thought it was a heat mirage. You know how hot roads seem to have water on them, how distant objects wobble and dance? It was like that, but shaped like people. Small people. 6 of them, maybe 7, playing in a clearing about half a mile down the mountain. I adjusted the binoculars' focus. The shapes got clearer. Children, define. Sightly children, wearing clothes that looked wrong somehow. Old-fashioned clothes. Long dresses on the girls, knickers and suspenders on the boys, like something from an old photograph. They were playing Ring Around the Rosie. I could see them holding hands, spinning in a circle. When they fell down at the end, they laughed, and I heard their laughter drifting up to my tower, clear as bells despite the distance. I watched them for 20 minutes. They played the same game over and over, never getting tired, never stopping for water or rest. In heat that would drop a grown man, these children played like it was a cool spring day. Something glinted in the clearing near where they played. I focused the binoculars and saw what looked like a pile of clothes. Small clothes, child-sized shirts and dresses and shoes scattered around like they'd been dropped in a hurry. The children never went near the pile of clothes. They stayed in their circle, playing their eternal game. Around 2 p.m., I heard a vehicle engine. Finally. I looked down the road and saw a Forest Service truck struggling up the steep grade. The maintenance crew, 3 hours late. The truck disappeared behind a curve about a mile down. I waited to see it emerge on the next straightaway. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. The truck never appeared. I tried the radio again. This time, instead of static, I got children singing. Hickory-dickory-dock. The mouse ran up the clock. The clock struck 1. The mouse ran down. Hickory-dickory-dock. "Base station, this is Shadow Mountain," I shouted into the microphone. "Emergency! The maintenance crew never made it to my location." The singing continued, drowning out any response. More voices joined in, a whole classroom of children singing nursery rhymes. Some songs I recognized, others sounded foreign, like different languages mixed together. I had to find that truck, grabbed water, my radio, and a first aid kit, then started down the mountain road. The heat hit me like a physical blow. Within minutes, sweat soaked through my shirt. The air was so dry it hurt to breathe. I found the truck about a mile down, where the road curved around a rocky outcrop. It had gone off the road and smashed into a cluster of pine trees. The front end was completely crushed. Steam rose from the radiator. "Hello!" I called out, running toward the wreck. "Anyone hurt?" I could see 2 people in the front seat. The driver's side door was jammed shut. I ran around to the passenger side and yanked the door open. The smell hit me first, smoke and burned meat and something else, something sweet and rotten that made my stomach turn. The passenger seat was empty, but the driver, I had to look away. The heat had done things to him, impossible things. No ordinary heat could have done that, not in the few hours since I'd seen the truck. Behind the truck, I found the second man. He'd gotten out somehow, had tried to run back up the road toward my tower. He'd made it maybe 50 feet before the same thing happened to him. I backed away from both bodies, my hands shaking so hard I could barely key my radio. Base station, emergency, 2 men are dead on Shadow Mountain Access Road, send help immediately. Nothing but children singing. Rock-a-bye baby, in the treetop when the wind blows, the cradle will rock. The singing got louder. I looked around and saw them. Not the distant children from the clearing, but different children. Closer children. They stood among the trees watching me, maybe 20 feet away. Still wearing those old-fashioned clothes, still looking like something from an old photograph. But these children looked older, sadder. Their clothes were torn and dirty. Some had burns on their faces and hands. They stared at me with eyes that had seen too much. One of them, a girl about 8 years old with pigtails, stepped closer. "Will you play with us?" she asked in a voice like autumn wind. "We've been waiting so long for someone to play with us." I stumbled backward, tripped, fell hard on the rocky road. When I looked up, the children were gone. Just empty forest and the smell of smoke drifting on the still air. But I could still hear them singing, all around me now, their voices echoing off the mountains. "We all fall down. We all fall down. We all fall down." I ran back up the mountain toward my tower, my heart hammering in my chest. Behind me, the children's laughter followed like smoke. By the time I got back to my tower, the sun was setting, but the temperature hadn't dropped at all. If anything, it felt hotter. The air shimmered around my tower like I was looking through water. My radio finally crackled to life. "Shadow Mountain, base station. Do you copy?" "Base station!" I gasped into the microphone. "2 men are dead. The maintenance crew crashed on the access road. Send help now." "Eleanor, are you all right? You sound upset." "I found their bodies. Something killed them. Something burned them." "Slow down. We sent a crew up to check your equipment, but they radioed in 2 hours ago that your access road is blocked by a rock slide. They're coming back tomorrow with heavy equipment." I stared at the radio. "That's impossible. I just saw their truck. They crashed into trees about a mile down the road." "Eleanor, there's no truck on your road. Are you feeling okay? The heat can play tricks on your mind." I wanted to scream. I'd seen the bodies, smelled the smoke, felt the unnatural heat rising from their burned flesh. "Check with them," I said. "Call them right now." "Hold on." Static filled the channel for long minutes. When base station came back, the voice sounded different, worried. "Eleanor, we can't reach the maintenance crew. Their truck isn't responding to radio calls. We're sending a helicopter up at first light." "Something's wrong up here," I whispered. I into the microphone. "Something's very wrong. Just stay calm. Keep your doors locked. We'll have you out of there first thing in the morning." The radio went dead. No static, no voices. Nothing. Like every electronic signal on the mountain had just stopped working. That's when I saw the glow. At first I thought it was a fire somewhere down the mountain. Orange light flickered between the trees, getting brighter as the sun disappeared. But this light moved wrong. It danced and jumped like flames, but flames that burned cold, that gave off light without heat. I climbed up to my tower room to get a better look. Through the binoculars, I could see the source of the glow. The old foundation stones I'd found earlier were burning, not with regular fire, with something else, something that made the air around them ripple and bend. Children moved around the burning foundation, dozens of them now. Some wore the old-fashioned clothes I'd seen before. Others wore more modern clothing, jeans and t-shirts from different decades. A few wore clothes so old they looked like they came from the 1800s. They held hands in a huge circle around the burning stones, spinning slowly like a giant wheel. Their faces glowed in the strange firelight, and I could see that some of them had been burned. Badly burned. Their hair was singed away, their skin blackened and cracked. But they were singing, always singing. Even with mouths that should no longer work, they sang their children's songs. As I watched, more children appeared. They came walking out of the forest, out of the rocks, some of them rising right up from the ground itself, all of them heading for the burning foundation, all of them joining the circle. I counted them through my binoculars. 50, 60, more than 100 children, all holding hands around that impossible fire. Then one of them looked up at my tower, the little girl with pigtails who had spoken to me earlier. She smiled and waved like I was her favorite teacher. Then she pointed at my tower. All the other children stopped spinning and looked up at me, 100 pairs of eyes reflecting the cold fire like mirrors. They started walking toward my tower. I ran down from the tower room and locked myself in the cabin. My hands shook as I tried the radio again and again. Dead silence. The telephone line was dead too. Even my weather instruments had stopped working. Outside I could hear them coming, footsteps in the dry leaves, voices singing, getting closer and closer. "Ring around the rosy," they sang, "pocket full of posies." I peeked out the window. They were all around my tower now, holding hands in circles within circles. Some walked around the tower base clockwise, others counterclockwise, like gears in some terrible machine. The little girl with pigtails stood right outside my window. She pressed her burned face against the glass and smiled at me. "Will you come out and play?" she asked. "We have such fun games to play." "What do you want?" I whispered. "We want to play," she said. "We've been playing the same games for so long. We want someone new to play with us." "What happened to you? How did you die?" Her smile faded. "The fire came. It always comes when the mountain gets too dry, too hot. The fire came to our school and we couldn't get out. But we didn't stop playing. Even when we burned, we kept playing our games." "That was a long time ago," I said. "You should rest. You should go to sleep." "We can't sleep," another voice said. A boy appeared at the window next to the girl. His clothes were more modern, maybe from the 1950s. Half his face was burned away, showing white bone underneath. "Every time the mountain gets hot like this, we wake up. And we're always so lonely." More faces appeared at the windows. Children from different times, different decades, all burned, all dead, all smiling at me with those terrible, hopeful eyes. "The men who came today," the first girl said, "they played with us, but they stopped playing too soon. They fell down and wouldn't get back up." I understood then. The maintenance crew hadn't died in a truck crash. These children had found them first, had tried to make them play their games, games that involved fire, games that children who were already dead could play safely, but living people could not. "We don't want to hurt you," the boy said. "We just want to play. Won't you come outside? We'll teach you our games." The temperature inside my cabin started to rise. I looked at my broken thermometer and saw the needle climbing. 90 degrees, 95, 100. The children were bringing their fire with them. "Come out and play," they all said together. "Come out and play with us." The cabin windows started to glow, not from firelight outside, but from heat building up inside. The children's fire was seeping through the walls like water through a sponge. I had a choice. Stay inside and burn to death, or go outside and face whatever games the fire children wanted to play. I chose the door. When I opened the cabin door, The children clapped their hands and cheered like I was coming out for recess. The night air should have felt cool after the heat building up inside, but it was even hotter outside. The children's presence turned the air into something you had to fight to breathe. "What do you want to play?" the little girl with pigtails asked. She took my hand with fingers that felt like warm candles. I thought fast. I was a teacher once. I knew how to handle groups of children, even unusual ones. "What games do you know?" I asked. "Ring around the rosy," said a boy in knickers. "London Bridge. Red light, green light." "Duck, duck, goose," called out a girl in a 1960s dress. They named game after game, all the playground favorites I remembered from my teaching days. But these children had been playing the same games for decades, some of them for more than a century. They knew the games, but they'd forgotten how games were supposed to end. "Can you teach us new games?" asked the girl, holding my hand. "We've played at all our games so many times." I saw my chance. "I know lots of games," I said, "but first, can you tell me your names? I like to know my students' names." They looked confused, like they'd forgotten names were something people had. "I'm Sarah," the pigtailed girl finally said. "I think it's hard to remember." "I'm Tommy," said the boy in knickers. "I died when was it? When the first school burned down." "I'm Rebecca," said a girl whose modern clothes suggested she'd died much more recently. "My school bus crashed during a field trip in 1978. The bus caught fire and, one by one, they told me their names and how they'd died. School fires, bus crashes, house fires. All children who had died in fires on or around Shadow Mountain over the past 150 years. The mountain collected them somehow, kept them playing their eternal recess." "You're all very good students," I said, falling back on my teacher voice. "But I notice you keep playing the same games over and over. Don't you want to learn something new?" "Yes," they said together. "Teach us! Teach us!" I looked around at the circle of burned, hopeful faces. More than 100 children who had been playing the same games for decades. They weren't evil, just lonely and confused and desperate for something new. "Okay," I said. "But this game has special rules. Are you ready to listen?" They nodded eagerly. "This game is called Growing Up," I said. "The rule is simple. When children get old enough, they have to stop playing playground games and move on to grown-up things. They have to graduate." Some of the children looked worried. "But we like our games," Sarah said. "I know you do. But in this game, when you graduate, you get to go somewhere even better than a playground. You get to go to a place where there are no fires, no pain, no loneliness. You get to rest." "What if we don't want to rest?" asked Tommy. "Then you stay playing the same games forever and ever, never learning anything new, never growing, never changing. Is that what you want?" I could see them thinking about it. These children had been trapped in an endless cycle of the same games, the same songs, the same loneliness. Part of them wanted something different. "How do we play growing up?" asked Rebecca. "It's easy. You just have to be brave enough to let go. Let go of the games. Let go of being scared. Let go of staying here." The air around us started to feel different, less hot, less thick. The strange glow from the foundation stones began to fade. "But we've been here so long," Sarah said. "This is home." "Home isn't a place," I told her. "Home is where you feel safe and loved and happy. Are you happy here?" She thought about that. They all did. And slowly, one by one, they shook their heads. "Then it's time to graduate," I said. Sarah was the first to let go of my hand. As soon as she did, she started to change. The burns on her face healed. Her torn dress became clean and white. She looked like a normal 8-year-old again, except she glowed with soft, warm light. "I remember now," she said. "I remember my mama and my papa. They're waiting for me, aren't they?" "Yes," I said. "They're waiting." She smiled, a real smile this time, not the desperate smile of someone trying to pretend everything was okay. Then she faded away like morning mist. One by one, The other children let go. Tommy straightened his little suspenders and waved goodbye. Rebecca fixed her 1970s hair and walked away into light that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Child after child, decade after decade of young souls, finally ready to move on from their eternal recess. The last to go was a boy who looked about 12, wearing clothes from maybe the 1920s. He'd been watching everything with serious eyes. "Are you sure they'll be okay?" he asked. "I'm sure," I said. "What about you? Will you be okay?" I looked around. The foundation stones had stopped glowing. The air felt normal again, still hot from the summer. Drought, but normal hot, not supernatural hot. In the distance, I could hear the sound of a helicopter. "I'll be fine," I said. He nodded and started to fade, but before he disappeared completely, he said, "Thank you for teaching us how to let go." Then I was alone on Shadow Mountain with just the sound of helicopter rotors getting closer. The rescue team found me sitting by my tower at dawn, dehydrated and exhausted, but alive. They said I'd been missing for 18 hours, but I swear it felt like days. They found the maintenance crew's truck wrapped around a tree on the access road, the 2 men inside dead from the crash and the heat. The official report blamed equipment malfunction for my radio problems and heat exhaustion for my disorientation. They said I'd hallucinated the voices and the children due to severe dehydration. Maybe they were right. Maybe the heat got to me and I imagined the whole thing. But I know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. And I know that sometimes, when the summer gets too dry and too hot on Shadow Mountain, you can still hear children singing in the distance. But now they're singing lullabies instead of playground songs, gentle songs to help other lost souls find their way home. I quit the Forest Service after that summer, went back to teaching, but elementary kids this time. When they play their recess games, I watch them with different eyes. I make sure they know that games are supposed to end, that growing up means learning when to let go. And sometimes, on the hottest days of summer, when the children are playing Ring Around the Rosie in the schoolyard, I think I hear other voices joining in. Happy voices, free voices, singing along from somewhere far away where fires can't reach and children can finally rest. The mountain is quiet now, but I know it remembers, and I know that somewhere, Sarah and Tommy and Rebecca and all the others are playing new games in better places, finally graduated from their eternal recess. Some lessons take longer to learn than others, but everyone gets to graduate eventually if they're just brave enough to let go. My name is Augustus McAllister, but folks just call me Gus. I've been a forest ranger in the Daniel Boone National Forest for 22 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these Kentucky mountains had to offer. I was wrong. It was September of 1987, and the humid air hung thick like a wet blanket over the Red River Gorge. Indian summer always hits hard here, making the morning fog so thick you can barely see your own boots. I was born and raised in these hills, just like my daddy and his daddy before him. We McAllisters have deep roots in this soil, deeper than most people know. See, my family has a complicated history with these mountains. My great-great-grandfather wasn't just any settler. He was one of the first moonshiners in this hollow. The family trade ran strong for generations until my daddy decided to go straight. That's why I became a ranger instead of following the old ways. But growing up, I heard all the stories about spirits in the holler, about how the mountains protect their own. Never believed a word of it. "Holler spirits are just stories to keep revenuers away," Daddy always said with a wink. But then he'd add, "Of course, these mountains do have their ways of protecting what's theirs." I specialized in law enforcement, mainly breaking up illegal operations. In 22 years, I'd shut down 89 moonshine stills and arrested more bootleggers than I could count. It wasn't personal. It was just my job. The irony wasn't lost on me that a McAllister was hunting moonshiners. But the law is the law. That morning, I got a call from my supervisor about a big DEA operation. Federal agents were coordinating a raid on what they called the largest moonshine operation in eastern Kentucky. The target was a hollow about 12 miles from the nearest county road, deep in territory where cell towers couldn't reach and outsiders weren't welcome. What made this different was the family running the operation, the Hendersons. They'd been making shine in that same hollow for over 200 years. Old-timers said the Henderson family was protected by something more than just good hiding spots and loyal neighbors. But I figured that was just mountain superstition. The DEA team consisted of 6 agents, all from outside Kentucky. They had fancy equipment, satellite phones, and enough firepower to take down a small army. Their leader, Agent Morrison, was a by-the-book type from Atlanta who looked at our mountains like they were enemy territory. "McAllister, you know these hills better than anyone," Morrison told me at the briefing. "We need you to guide us to this Henderson operation and help with the arrest." I knew the hollow he was talking about. It was a strange place, even by mountain standards. The fog never seemed to lift completely, and animals acted skittish near the entrance. Local hunters avoided it, claiming their dogs wouldn't track game in there. But I'd always figured it was just the terrain, lots of caves and rock formations that could confuse sounds and scents. The plan seemed simple enough. We'd hike in at dawn, surround the still, and make the arrests. The Henderson family had been running their operation for so long they'd gotten careless. Satellite photos showed buildings and equipment scattered throughout the hollow. It should have been an easy bust. As we prepared to head out that morning, something felt off. The fog was thicker than usual, moving in ways that didn't match the wind direction. My radio crackled with strange static, and my truck's engine hesitated before starting. But I blamed it on the humid weather and old equipment. "Never did trust federal agents," I muttered to myself as I checked my gear. "Too much fancy equipment. Not enough mountain sense." Standing at the trailhead, that led into Henderson Hollow, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. The fog seemed to pulse like a living thing, and somewhere deep in the hollow I could swear I heard the sound of someone calling my name. But federal agents don't wait for mountain superstitions. Morrison was already heading down the trail, his team following in single file. I took a deep breath and followed them into the mist, not knowing I was walking into something that would change everything I believed about these ancient mountains. The last thing I remember thinking before we entered the hollow was something my daddy used to say. "The mountains remember everything, Gus. Everything." The trail into Henderson Hollow wound down through sandstone cliffs and natural rock arches that looked like cathedral doorways. The deeper we went, the thicker the fog became, until we were walking through what felt like gray cotton. Our voices seemed muffled, like the air itself was swallowing sound. Agent Morrison checked his GPS device every few minutes, but I noticed him frowning at it more and more. "Damn thing keeps glitching," he muttered. The satellite phone was having problems too, producing nothing but static when he tried to check in with his base. "Electronics don't work so good in these hollows," I told him. "All the iron in the rock, plus the moisture. Best to rely on your compass and landmarks." But even I was starting to feel unsettled. I'd hiked these mountains for decades, but this felt different. The fog was moving against the wind, swirling in patterns that made no natural sense. And there was a smell in the air, not just the usual scent of pine and damp earth, but something else. Something old and sour, like whiskey that had been aging for way too long. About 2 miles in, Agent Morrison stopped and held up his fist. We all froze. Through the mist ahead, we could see the outline of buildings. Rough wooden structures that looked like they'd been there since frontier times. Smoke was rising from what had to be the main still. "There it is," Morrison whispered, peered into his radio. But instead of his team's voices, all we heard was a low hum of static. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. All our electronic equipment had died at exactly the same time. Not just the radios and GPS, even Morrison's digital watch had stopped. The agents were checking their gear with growing panic, but I was looking at something else entirely. The fog around us was moving in a perfect circle, like we were standing in the eye of a storm. And at the edges of that circle, I could swear I saw shapes moving, human-shaped shadows that didn't match any of our team. "Sir," whispered Agent Kowalski, the youngest member of Morrison's team, "something's wrong here. My weapon won't fire." He was right. When Morrison tried to chamber a round in his service pistol, Nothing happened. The firing pin clicked, but no bullet loaded. It was like the gun had forgotten how to work. "Equipment malfunction," Morrison said, but his voice was shaky. "We continue with the mission." As we approached the still, the wrongness got worse. I could hear the bubble and hiss of moonshine being made, could smell the sharp bite of corn mash and alcohol. But there were no people around the equipment. The still was running itself. Wooden buckets moved along a conveyor system that creaked and groaned, but no hands guided them. Copper tubing twisted and coiled like living snakes, and the fire under the main pot burned without anyone feeding it wood. Steam rose from the apparatus in spirals that formed shapes in the air, shapes that looked almost like faces. "Where is everyone?" Agent Thompson asked, and his voice echoed strangely in the hollow. That's when we found the first sign of the Henderson family. Their boots were lined up neatly outside the main cabin, as if they'd just stepped out of them. But the boots were old, not just worn, but ancient. Leather sea, racked with age, metal eyelets green with rust. These weren't boots that had been worn yesterday or even last year. They looked like they belonged in a museum. Morrison tried his radio. Again. This time, instead of static, we heard voices. Faint at first, then growing clearer. They were speaking in old-fashioned accents, using words I hadn't heard since my great-grandmother was alive. "Strangers in the holler," one voice said. "Government men with their fancy guns," said another. "Time to protect what's ours," came a third voice, deeper than the others. Morrison's face went pale. "Base, this is Alpha Team. We have a situation here. Request immediate backup." The radio crackled, and then a voice answered. But it wasn't from his base. It was an old man's voice, speaking with the thick accent of mountain people from generations past. "No backup coming, son. You're in Henderson territory now. Been protected for nigh on 200 years, and ain't no government gonna change that." That's when the screaming started. It came from behind us, back up the trail. Agent Kowalski spun around, his weapon raised, but there was nothing to see except fog. The screaming went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then it cut off like someone had flipped a switch. "Kowalski, report!" Morrison barked into his radio, but Kowalski was standing right beside us. The screaming had come from somewhere else entirely. Someone else entirely. "Sir," I said quietly, "we need to leave, now." But when we turned to head back up the trail, it wasn't there anymore. The path we'd followed down into the hollow had vanished. In its place was solid rock wall, covered in moss that looked like it had been growing there for centuries. The fog began to thicken even more, and in its swirling depths, I started to see them clearly for the first time. People in old-fashioned clothes, men in rough homespun shirts and women in long dresses. They moved through the mist like they belonged there, like they'd always been there. And they were all looking at us with eyes that held too, "He wisdom of the grave." The spirits materialized slowly, like photographs developing in chemical baths. First just outlines in the fog, then clearer shapes, until I could make out faces and clothes and the way they moved. There had to be 20 of them, maybe more, all dressed like people from the 1800s. Men with long beards and worn work clothes, women in patched dresses with their hair pinned back, children with bare feet and serious eyes. But the strangest thing wasn't seeing them. It was recognizing them. The tall man with the gray beard standing near the still looked exactly like my great-great-grandfather in the old tintype photo my grandmother had kept on her mantel. The woman beside him had the same high cheekbones and dark eyes as my great-aunt Polly. These weren't just any spirits. They were my family. Agent Morrison was backing away, his useless gun still in his hands. "What the hell is happening here?" The gray-bearded man stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of generations. "You're trespassing on sacred ground, government man. This hollow has been protected by the Henderson clan and their kin for 200 years. I'm Federal Agent Morrison. You're all under arrest for operating an illegal distillery." The spirits looked at each other and began to laugh. It wasn't a pleasant sound. It echoed off the canyon walls like the voices of the dead, which I guess they were. Arrest us? The old man grinned, showing teeth yellow with age. Son, we been dead longer than you been alive. What you gonna do, shoot us? That's when Agent Thompson made a mistake. He aimed his weapon at the nearest spirit and pulled the trigger. The gun fired this time, the bullet passing straight through the ghostly figure. But instead of the spirit disappearing, something else happened. Thompson started aging. I watched in horror as wrinkles appeared on his face, his hair turning gray, then white. His back bent, his hands grew spotted with age, and in less than a minute, Agent Thompson looked like he was 90 years old. Please, he whispered with a voice cracked by decades. I have kids. I have a wife. The gray-bearded spirit walked over to him. So did we, once upon a time. Government men like you killed my boy in 1892, shot him for running shine to feed his family. Thompson collapsed to his knees, his aged body unable to support itself. He wasn't dead, but he was trapped in a body that had lived far longer than it should have. The other agents were panicking now. Agent Morrison grabbed my arm. You know these mountains. How do we get out of here? But before I could answer, we heard more screaming. This time, it was coming from all around us. The fog carried voices, men shouting, women crying, children calling for their parents. It was like listening to 200 years of violence and suffering all at once. Every revenger who died in this hollow, the old spirit said, looking directly at me. Every federal agent who tried to stop what's been ours since before this was even a country. They're all here now, boy. All except you. Why not me? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Because your blood. Your great-great-grandfather, Jeremiah McAllister, helped build the first still in this hollow. You got Henderson blood in your veins through your grandmother's line. This is your family, boy, whether you claim us or not. Agent Morrison was backing away from the spirits, but they were everywhere now. They moved through the fog like smoke themselves, appearing and disappearing at will. McAllister, do something! You're law enforcement! But I was starting to understand that there were laws older than the ones written in government books. These mountains had their own justice, their own way of protecting what mattered. The spirit of my great-great-grandfather approached me. Up close, I could see the family resemblance even stronger. We had the same nose, the same stubborn jaw, the same dark eyes. You got a choice to make, Augustus, he said, using my full name the way my grandmother used to. You can stand with your blood, or you can stand with them government men. But choose quick, because more of them are coming. He was right. Through the fog, I could hear vehicles approaching, backup agents responding to Morrison's last radio call. But they had no idea what they were walking into. The hollow protects itself, my ancestor continued. Always has. We made sure of that when we passed over. But now it needs a living guardian, someone who can walk in both worlds. Agent Morrison tried to grab me. You're a federal officer, McAllister. You took an oath. But Agent Rodriguez was screaming behind us. I turned to see spirits surrounding her, their hands glowing with an eerie light. Wherever they touched her, her uniform aged and crumbled, becoming the rough clothing of mountain people from long ago. They're changing us, she cried. They're making us like them. The spirits were indeed transforming the federal agents, not just aging them, but changing their very nature. Soon Morrison and his team would become part of the Hollow's defenses, bound to protect it for eternity. My great-great-grandfather placed a translucent hand on my shoulder. I could feel the cold of the grave, but also something else. Love, family, belonging. The choice is yours, boy, but choose now, before it's too late. Through the fog, I could hear vehicles getting closer, more federal agents, more guns, more men who didn't understand what they were dealing with. The Hollow was preparing to defend itself again, just like it had for 2 centuries. And I was caught in the middle, between the law I'd sworn to uphold and the blood that ran in my veins. The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, helicopters and trucks carrying a small army of federal agents. Morrison's Balspas. A cup had arrived, but they had no idea they were walking into a supernatural war zone. 30 agents incoming, Morrison said, trying his radio one more time. Somehow it was working again, crackling with distant voices. Full tactical team with automatic weapons. My great-great-grandfather's spirit looked sad. They never learn, do they, Augustus? Think they can solve everything with more guns, more violence. Around us, the other spirits were growing more solid, more powerful. The air itself seemed to thicken with their presence. Agent Rodriguez had stopped screaming. Her transformation was almost complete. She now wore a long dress like the mountain women, and her eyes held the same ancient wisdom as the dead. Please, Agent Morrison begged me. You're still law enforcement. Help us get out of here. But Thompson, aged beyond his years, laughed bitterly from where he sat on the ground. Don't you see? We're not getting out. We're becoming part of this place, just like everyone else who ever tried to destroy it. The first helicopter appeared through the fog, its rotors beating against the thick air. But as soon as it crossed into the hollow's boundaries, its engines began to sputter. I watched it spiral down, making an emergency landing in a clearing that hadn't been there moments before. The hollow decides who enters and who leaves, my ancestor explained. Always has. That's how we've stayed hidden so long. More agents poured out of the crashed helicopter, weapons ready. But their guns wouldn't fire. Their radios produced only static, and their equipment aged before their eyes. The hollow was defending itself the only way it knew how. Stop this, I shouted at the spirits. They're just doing their jobs. So were the men who killed my family, said another spirit, a woman with sad eyes. So were the agents who burned our homes in 1934. Jobs don't make murder right. But as I watched the federal agents stumbling through the fog, confused and terrified, I realized something important. They weren't murderers. They were just people following order. Yes, trying to enforce laws they believed in. Most of them probably had families, children, lives they wanted to get back to. The spirits sensed my thoughts. My great-great-grandfather nodded approvingly. You got a good heart, boy. That's why the hollow chose you. Chose me for what? To be the bridge, the living guardian who can speak for both worlds. I looked around at the chaos. Spirits and federal agents caught in an endless cycle of violence and revenge. Agent Morrison was on his knees now, aging rapidly as spectral hands touched him. The backup team was scattered through the fog, their weapons useless, their training worthless against supernatural forces. What do you want? I called out to all the spirits. What will it take to end this? The gray-bearded patriarch stepped forward. Respect. Recognition. Let the government know this hollow is sacred ground, protected by forces older than their laws. No more raids, no more interference. Let the mountain ways survive. And in return? Your people go free. The ones still alive, anyway. They leave and never come back. And we let them keep their natural ages and forms. I looked at Agent Morrison, who was still conscious despite his rapid aging. His eyes met mine, and I saw desperation there, but also understanding. He was beginning to realize this was bigger than any law enforcement operation. You'd do that? He asked the spirits. Let us go? If our terms are met, my ancestor replied. If young Augustus here agrees to be our voice in the living world. The weight of the decision pressed down on me like the fog itself. Accept, and I'd have to resign from federal service, give up my career, my pension, everything I'd worked for. I'd become something between the living and the dead, responsible for protecting a hollow full of illegal moonshine operations and ancient spirits. Refuse and watch dozens of Federos. Will agents die or be transformed into supernatural guardians against their will? I'll do it, I said finally, but I have conditions too. The spirits waited. No more killing, no more aging. People to death. If someone stumbles into the hollow by accident, you send them away confused but unharmed. And the Henderson family's moonshine operation, it becomes legal. I'll work with state authorities to get them the proper permits. The spirits murmured among themselves in voices like wind through dead leaves. Finally, my great-great-grandfather nodded. Agreed. But you understand what this means for you, Augustus. I did. I'd be giving up my life as Gus McAllister, federal forest ranger. I'd become something new, a guardian of the old ways, protector of secrets that went back centuries. The government will want an official explanation, Morrison said weakly, his voice cracked with premature age. Flash flood, I told him. Happens all the time in these hollows. You were investigating illegal stills when the weather turned. 6 agents swept away, bodies never recovered. Area declared too dangerous for future operations. As I spoke the words, I felt something changing inside me. The fog seemed less thick, the spirits less frightening. I was becoming part of their world, part of their eternal watch over the hollow. The transformation had begun. 6 months later, I stood at the edge of Henderson Hollow wearing civilian clothes for the first time in 22 years. The official report had been filed, the area declared an environmental disaster zone, and federal access permanently restricted. Agent Morrison and his surviving team members had been debriefed, their memories altered just enough to make their story believable. They remembered a flash flood, equipment failures, and the tragic loss of 6 good agents. They didn't remember spirits or supernatural transformations. The hollow had been merciful in that way, allowing them to return to their normal lives with their sanity intact. As for me, I'd officially resigned from the Forest Service, citing personal reasons. My pension was gone, my federal benefits canceled. According to government records, Augustus McAllister had simply walked away from his career and disappeared into the Kentucky mountains. In a way, that was exactly what had happened. The Henderson family's moonshine operation was now completely legal, licensed as a historical distillery preserving traditional Appalachian methods. Tourists could visit the hollow on guided tours, though they never saw anything more supernatural than some unusually thick fog and maybe a few strange sounds echoing off the canyon walls. I lived in a cabin near the hollow's entrance now, officially employed as a historical interpreter and unofficially serving as guardian of secrets that went back centuries. The spirits visited me regularly, sometimes to share memories of the old days, sometimes just to check on how I was handling my new role. My great-great-grandfather appeared most often. You made the right choice, Augustus, he told me one evening as we sat by my fire. The mountains need someone who understands both worlds. But the hollow in Kentucky wasn't unique. As word spread through channels I didn't fully understand, other protected areas began appearing throughout the Appalachian Mountains. Places where the old ways still held power, where spirits of long-dead families maintained their eternal watch. I received visitors sometimes, forest rangers, federal agents, local law enforcement officers who'd stumbled onto something they couldn't explain. I'd listen to their stories, offer advice, and when necessary, help them understand that some things were older and more powerful than government authority. The mountains, it turned out, had been protecting themselves all along. They'd just been waiting for the right person to help them negotiate with the modern world. Sometimes I wondered about Agent Morrison and his team. I'd return to their normal lives. But I could see in Morrison's eyes that he remembered more than he let on. The hollow had changed all of us, in ways both seen and unseen. Late at night, when the fog rolled thick through the valleys and the air hummed with ancient power, I'd hear the spirits of all the federal agents who hadn't been so lucky over the years. They'd made their peace with the hollow eventually, becoming part of its eternal defense. Their voices joined the mountain wind, warning away those who might threaten what they now protected. The moonshine still operated every night, tended by hands both living and dead. The Henderson family worked alongside their ancestors, preserving traditions that were older than America itself, and I stood watch, a bridge between worlds that were never meant to be separate. My daddy had been right all along. The mountains do remember everything, and some things are worth protecting, even if it means becoming something more than human to do it. The hollow keeps its secrets still, but now it has a voice in the living world, someone who can speak for the dead and negotiate with the living. The old ways survive, hidden in the fog and protected by forces that government badges and federal authority can't touch. Just remember, if you ever find yourself hiking in eastern Kentucky and the fog starts moving against the wind, If your electronics fail and you hear voices in languages that sound almost familiar, turn around and walk away. Some places aren't meant for outsiders, and some traditions are protected by guardians who never sleep. The mountains are patient. They've been here long before governments and laws, and they'll be here long after. And as long as families like the Hendersons keep the old ways alive, the spirits will keep their eternal watch. Trust me, I know. My name is Augustus McAllister, and I'm the guardian of Henderson Hollow. Some folks just call me the bridge between worlds. My name is Mitchell Braxton, and I've been a forest ranger for 14 years. I've tracked over 400 black bears through these West Virginia mountains, pulled lost hikers out of ravines, and seen just about everything the wilderness can throw at you. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened in December of 1978. I was sitting in my cabin that morning drinking coffee and watching the snow pile up outside my window. The Weather Service was calling for the worst blizzard in 20 years. Temperature was already down to 15 below, and the wind was howling like a banshee through the spruce trees. That's when the radio crackled to life. "Mitchell, you there?" It was Sarah from dispatch, and she sounded worried. "I'm here. What's going on?" "We got a problem up on Blackwater Ridge. Hunting party of 6 men didn't come back yesterday. Their families are getting scared." I knew the area well. Blackwater Falls State Park sits right in the heart of the Canaan Valley Wilderness, about 25 miles from the nearest town. In this weather, those roads would be completely blocked. If something happened up there, those men were on their own. "Any idea where they set up camp?" I asked. "Last anyone heard, they were heading for the old logging camp near the falls. You know the spot." I did know it. Remote area, thick forest, and this time of year the frozen waterfalls made it beautiful but dangerous. Perfect place for city hunters to get in over their heads. "I'll head out soon as I can get the snowmobile running," I told her. "Be careful, Mitchell. Weather's only getting worse." I've always been a practical man. Grew up in these mountains, served 2 tours in Vietnam as a sniper, came back and put my tracking skills to good use protecting people from the wilderness. The old German settlers used to tell wild stories about something they called Schwal, Arzbär, some kind of black bear demon that lived in the high country. But I never put much stock in fairy tales. Bears were dangerous enough without making up monsters. I loaded my gear, rifle, emergency supplies, first aid kit, and enough food for 3 days. The snowmobile started on the 3rd try, and I headed out into the storm. The world was pure white, with visibility down to maybe 20 feet. I followed the old logging road, dodging fallen branches and fighting through drifts that came up to my chest. It took me 4 hours to reach the area where the hunters should have been. By then, the storm was getting worse, and I was starting to worry about getting back myself. But as I came around a bend in the trail, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The hunting cabin was destroyed. Not damaged, destroyed. The wooden walls were torn apart like they were made of paper. Logs that would take 2 strong men to lift were scattered around the clearing like toys. And the trees, Jesus, the trees. There were claw marks gouged deep into the bark, starting about 7 feet off the ground and going up another 5 feet. I'd never seen anything like it. I shut off the snowmobile and walked closer, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The marks were too big for any bear I knew, and they were too high. Even a big male black bear standing on his hind legs couldn't reach that far up a tree. That's when I found the first track. It was in a sheltered spot where the snow wasn't as deep, pressed into a patch of frozen mud, 18 inches long, with what looked like claw marks at the front. But there was something wrong with it, something that made my hands shake as I knelt down for a closer look. There were thumb marks. Bears don't have thumbs. I'd been tracking bears for more than a decade. I knew their sign like I knew my own face in the mirror. This wasn't a bear track, but it wasn't human either. It was something in between, something that shouldn't exist. The forest around me was dead quiet. No bird calls, no squirrels chattering, no sounds at all, except the wind in the trees. Even in the worst weather, you usually heard something, but every living thing had cleared out of this area. They knew something I didn't. I stood up and looked around the ruined campsite again. 6 men had been here 2 days ago. Where were they now? The tracks led north, deeper into the wilderness. I followed them on foot, leaving the snowmobile behind. Each print was perfectly clear in the snow, and they were spaced about 6 feet apart. Whatever made them was taking huge strides. About a mile from the destroyed cabin, I found something that stopped me dead in my tracks. It was a rifle, or what was left of one. The barrel was bent completely in half, like someone had taken a steel pipe and folded it like a piece of wire. The stock was splintered into a dozen pieces. Scattered around it were 30-06 shells, still in their brass cases but crushed flat. I picked up one of the shells and turned it over in my gloved hand. It would take incredible force to do this. More force than any animal I knew could produce. The tracks continued north, and I followed them like a man in a dream. This had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe the hunters had brought explosives, and there'd been an accident. Maybe the cabin had been hit by lightning. There had to be a reasonable explanation. But deep down, I was starting to think about those old German stories. The wind picked up, and I had to pull my hood down tight against the stinging snow. The tracks were getting harder to follow as the blizzard covered them up. I was maybe 3 miles from my snowmobile now, in country that would be hell to navigate if the storm got any worse. That's when I heard the helicopter. The sound came faint through the wind, but it was definitely there. State police, probably doing an aerial search for the missing hunters. I tried to signal with my flashlight, but the snow was too thick. The helicopter circled the area twice, the sound of its rotors getting closer then farther away. Then the engine noise changed. Got rough, like it was struggling. I heard it coming down fast, too fast, crashing through tree branches with sounds like gunshots. The silence afterward was worse than any noise. I changed direction and headed toward where I thought the helicopter had gone down. It took me another hour to find it, following the broken branches and scattered debris. The aircraft had hit hard, carving a path through the forest before slamming into a cluster of big pine trees. I ran toward the wreckage, hoping to find survivors. But when I got close enough to see inside the cockpit, I stopped so fast I almost fell over. The pilot and his observer were dead, but not from the crash. They'd been torn apart. The cockpit was painted red, and there were claw marks scraped deep into the metal, the same claw marks I'd seen on the trees back at the cabin. Whatever had destroyed the hunting camp had brought down this helicopter too, but helicopters don't just fall out of the sky because an animal roars at them. I was backing away from the wreckage when I heard it for the first time. A sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, part roar, part scream, part something else that made my spine crawl. It was so loud that snow shook loose from the trees above me and came down like white rain. No bear made a sound like that. No animal I knew made a sound like that. Through the swirling snow about 50 yards away, I caught a glimpse of something huge and dark moving between the trees. It was walking upright like a man, but it was way too big to be human. Even through the storm, I could tell it was at least 12 feet tall. I did what any sane person would do. I ran. I crashed through the forest, following my own tracks back toward the snowmobile. Branches tore at my clothes and snow got into my boots, but I didn't slow down. Behind me I could hear trees cracking and falling as something massive pushed through them. It was following me. I made it. Back to the snowmobile and got it started on the first try. The engine roared to life and I gunned it down the old logging road without looking back. But even over the noise of the engine and the wind, I could still hear that awful roaring behind me. And it was getting closer. I made it back to my cabin as the sun was setting. The storm was still raging, but I was safe behind solid walls with a good fire and my 30-06 within reach. I tried to call dispatch, but the radio was dead, probably ice on the antenna. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. That glimpse through the snow had lasted maybe 2 seconds, but the image was burned into my brain. Something walking on 2 legs, covered in dark fur, with arms that hung down past where its knees would be. I'd found an old journal in the cabin when I first got this job. It belonged to Klaus Brenner, a German settler who'd lived in this area back in the 1890s. Most of it was about farming and weather, but there were some pages that talked about something else. Something he called Der Fluch des Schwarzen Bären, the curse of the black bear. According to Klaus, his grandfather had killed a bear that the local Native Americans considered sacred. The tribe's medicine man had cursed the family, saying that one of their bloodline would take the bear's form and guard the mountains forever. Klaus wrote about strange sightings, livestock killed in impossible ways, and family members who disappeared in the deep woods. I'd always figured it was just superstition. Now I wasn't so sure. The next morning dawned clear and cold. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of new snow. I got the radio working and called dispatch. "Mitchell, thank God you're okay. We lost contact with that state police helicopter yesterday. Any sign of them?" "Found the crash site," I told Sarah. "Both crew members are dead." "Jesu, that's what happened." I took a long breath. "Something attacked them. Same thing that got the hunters, I think." There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then, "Mitchell, are you feeling all right? Did you hit your head or something?" "I'm fine, Sarah, but there's something up here, something dangerous. The rescue team will be there in a few hours. Just sit tight and wait for them." But I couldn't sit tight. 6 people were dead, and whatever killed them was still out there. It was my job to protect people in these mountains, and I wasn't going to hide in my cabin while that thing roamed free. I loaded my pack with extra ammunition and set out again. This time, I wasn't just following tracks, I was hunting. The trail led me back to the crash site, then beyond it, into country I'd never explored. The tracks were easier to follow now that the snow had stopped, and they told a story that made my blood run cold. Whatever made them wasn't just wandering around randomly. It was patrolling. The tracks formed a rough circle about 5 miles across, like it was marking territory. And inside that circle, I started finding bodies. The first hunter was buried under a pile of snow near a frozen stream. He'd been running when it caught him. His tracks showed he'd made it maybe 50 yards from his last camp before being pulled down. The look on his face, well, that's something I try not to remember. The second one was hanging from a tree, frozen solid. The third was just gone. Nothing left but bloodstains in the snow and scraps of clothing. But it was the fourth hunter that really shook me up. I found him in a natural shelter formed by fallen logs, still alive. Barely. He was maybe 25 years old, city boy from Charleston who probably thought hunting was like shooting targets at the range. When he saw me coming, he started crying. "It's still out there," he whispered. "It's been watching me all night, playing with me." "What did you see?" I asked, giving him some water from my canteen. "We were just sitting around the camp telling stories. Jimmy was making coffee. Then we heard this sound, like nothing I ever heard before. We grabbed our rifles, but..." He stopped talking and stared at something over my shoulder. I turned around, but there was nothing there except trees and snow. But what? It came out of the forest, walking like a man. 12 feet tall, covered in black fur. Had a face like a bear, but it looked at us. Really looked, like it was thinking. Planning. The kid was in shock, probably hypothermic. But his story matched what I'd seen. Something was out there. Something that shouldn't exist. "It killed Tommy first," he continued. "Just reached out with one hand and crushed him. Then it started chasing the rest of us, but not to kill us right away. It was herding us, keeping us in this area." "Herding you toward what?" He pointed north toward a ridge of cliffs I could see through the trees. "Up there. There's a cave. That's where it lives." I got the kid stable as I could and marked the location on my map. Then I started working my way toward the ridge. If this thing had a den, maybe I could find a way to trap it or drive it off. The climb took most of the afternoon. The cliffs were treacherous in the snow, but I'd done worse in Vietnam. As I got higher, I started noticing things that made my skin crawl. Bones scattered around the cliff base. Not just deer and elk, but bigger bones. Human bones, some of them very old. Claw marks gouged deep into the rock face, forming what looked almost like territorial markings. And the smell. Even in the freezing air, there was a musky, animal stench that got stronger as I climbed. I was maybe 50 feet from what looked like a cave opening when I heard movement above me. Rocks scattered down, followed by a low, growling sound that seemed to come from the mountain itself. I looked up, and saw it clearly for the first time. The thing was enormous, easily 12 feet tall and probably weighing more than 1,000 pounds. It was covered in thick black fur with arms that reached almost to the ground. The face was bear-like, but more human than any bear had a right to be. And the eyes were intelligent. It wasn't just looking at me, it was studying me, figuring out what I was and what I planned to do. We stared at each other for maybe 10 seconds. Then it opened its mouth and roared. The sound hit me like a physical force, so loud I couldn't hear my own thoughts. Snow cascaded down the cliff face, and I had to grab onto a rocky outcrop to keep from being swept away. When the echoes finally died down, the creature was gone. But I knew it would be back. I made it down from the cliff as darkness was falling. The rescue team had found the surviving hunter and gotten him to safety, but they hadn't believed his story about a giant creature. They were treating it like a bear attack, dangerous, but nothing they couldn't handle with some extra firepower. They were wrong. That night, I sat in my cabin cleaning my rifle and thinking about what I'd learned. The creature was intelligent, territorial, and had been killing people for decades, maybe longer. The old German settlers' journal suggested it had been in these mountains for generations, passed down like some kind of family curse. But curses weren't real. This was something flesh and blood, which meant it could be killed. I'd brought down charging grizzlies in Alaska and faced enemy snipers in the jungle. Whatever this thing was, it could bleed. The question was whether I could make it bleed enough. I loaded up on ammunition and set out before dawn. The plan was simple. Find the creature's den, trap it inside, and finish it. Not elegant, but sometimes the direct approach was best. The climb back up the cliff took me most of the morning. This time I was ready for it. For anything. Rifle loaded, extra magazines in easy reach, and a few surprises I'd picked up from my military days. The cave was about 30 feet deep, carved out of the living rock. Ancient. Bones littered the floor and the walls were covered with claw marks that went back decades. Some of the marks were small, made by normal-sized claws. Others were huge, like the ones I'd been following. There was definitely more than one of these things, maybe a whole family of them, living in the deep mountains and coming down to hunt when they got hungry. But only one was active now. The big one. The alpha. I set up near the cave mouth and waited. In Vietnam, I'd learned that patience was a sniper's best weapon. Rushing into a fight got you killed. Better to let the enemy come to you. I didn't have to wait long. The creature came up the cliff face just after noon, moving with surprising grace for something so large. It had something in its hands. Looked like the remains of a deer it had killed for lunch. When it saw me sitting by the cave entrance, it stopped and tilted its head like a curious dog. We looked at each other across maybe 20 yards of rocky ground. Up close, I could see details that made my skin crawl. The thing's hands were almost human, with opposable thumbs and fingers that could grip like a man's. Its face showed expressions, surprise, anger, and something that might have been amusement. It dropped the deer carcass and took a step toward me. "That's far enough," I said, raising the rifle. The creature paused. Then it did something that made my blood freeze. It spoke. Not words exactly, but sounds that were trying to be words, like it had heard human speech and was attempting to copy it. The meaning was clear enough. It was challenging me. "You killed those people," I said, keeping the rifle trained on its chest. "You brought down that helicopter. Can't let you keep doing that." The thing made more sounds, angrier this time. It gestured toward the forest below, then at the cave behind it. Its territory. Its home. "I understand," I told it. "But you crossed the line when you started killing humans." That's when it charged. The thing moved faster than anything that big had a right to move. I got one shot off, hit its center mass, but it barely slowed down. Then we were fighting hand to hand, or rather, hand to claw. Its strength was unbelievable. It grabbed my rifle and crushed the barrel in its grip like I was watching it happen in slow motion. Then it backhanded me across the ledge, and I felt my ribs crack. But 14 years of ranger work and 2 tours in Vietnam had taught me a few things about fighting dirty. As the creature came at me again, I rolled aside and pulled the pins on 2 grenades I'd been saving for an emergency. "See you in hell," I muttered. and tossed them into the cave. The explosion brought down half the cliff face. Rock and snow came sliding down in an avalanche that swept both of us over the edge and into the forest below. I woke up buried under 3 feet of debris, with my left arm twisted at an angle that wasn't natural. Pain shot through my chest with every breath, and I could taste blood in my mouth. But I was alive. The creature lay about 20 feet away, half buried like me, but much worse off. The explosion had torn chunks out of its hide, and one of its arms was bent backward at the shoulder. Dark blood stained the snow around it. As I watched, it raised its head and looked at me. There was no anger in its eyes anymore, just exhaustion. It made a sound that might have been a sigh, then struggled to its feet. For a moment, I thought it was going to attack again. Instead, it turned and limped away into the deep forest. I tried to follow, but my broken arm wouldn't let me hold a rifle, and my ribs felt like they were made of glass. The last I saw of it was a dark shape disappearing between the trees, leaving a trail of blood in the snow. The rescue team found me 2 hours later, half-tan, frozen and talking nonsense about monsters in the mountains. They airlifted me to the hospital in Charleston, where the doctors patched me up and asked a lot of questions I couldn't answer. Honestly, the official report listed 6 hunters dead, killed by a rogue bear that was later destroyed in a controlled explosion. The helicopter crew died when their aircraft experienced mechanical failure during the storm. No mention of anything unusual, but the Forest Service quietly declared the entire Blackwater Ridge area a protected wildlife sanctuary. No hunting, no camping, no human access without special permits. They said it was to protect the ecosystem, but I knew better. They were protecting people from what lived up there. I retired from the Ranger Service 6 months later. My arm healed, but it's never been quite right, and I can't seem to get warm anymore, even in the summer. The cold from that December night seems to have gotten into my bones. Sometimes I have dreams about the creature. I see it watching me from the tree line, its intelligent eyes following my every move. In the dreams, it's not alone. There are others with it, smaller ones that might be its offspring. The mountains are full of stories, if you know how to listen for them. Stories about things that shouldn't exist, but do anyway. Stories about the price we pay when we forget that some places aren't meant for human feet. I still live in West Virginia, though I moved down to the valley where the towns are bigger and the lights stay on all night. Sometimes I hear reports from the high country, hikers who disappeared, campers who found their sites destroyed, hunters who came back with stories nobody believes. But I believe them, because I know what hunts in the dark places of the world. I know what watches from the shadows between the trees. And I know that some boundaries exist for very good reasons. The creature I fought that day is still out there somewhere, deeper in the wilderness than most people will ever go. Maybe it learned to stay away from humans. Maybe it's teaching others to do the same. Or maybe it's just waiting. Either way, I sleep with a loaded rifle next to my bed and keep my doors locked tight. Some habits die hard when you've seen what I've seen. The old German settlers were right about one thing. There are places in these mountains where something dark lives, something that remembers when the world was wilder, and humans knew their place in it. Schwarzbär, they called it, the black bear demon. But I know the truth now. It's not a demon, it's something much worse. It's real. My name is Jacob Whitmore, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 19 years. In all that time, leading over 200 cave rescues, I never lost a single person underground. Not once. That record meant everything to me. Until October 1962. People always ask me about the Cherokee stories my grandmother used to tell. She'd sit on her porch in the evenings, smoking her pipe, telling me about the Nunahai, the spirit people who lived in the deep places. They guard the hollows, Jacob, she'd say. The women who cry in the caves, they protect what's sacred. I never believed her. Not until I had to. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 8 Girl Scouts from a Knoxville troop had gone missing during a cave exploration trip near Cataract Falls. The area was remote, about 8 miles from Gatlinburg, in a hollow so deep the radio barely worked on good days. Their leader, Mrs. Henderson, had brought them to see the limestone formations. Educational trip, she called it. They never came back out. I knew that cave system better than most. Spent years mapping it, studying the geology, learning every tunnel and chamber. The limestone was old, older than the mountains themselves, carved by underground streams that had been flowing since before humans walked these hills. It was beautiful down there, in a way that made you feel small. The morning was cold for October. Frost covered the rhododendron leaves, and fog hung thick between the trees like smoke. I loaded my gear into the truck: ropes, lights, first aid kit, the usual rescue equipment. My hands were steady. They always were. Had to be, in this job. I'd been working alone more since Sarah died in '59. Car accident on Highway 441, black ice. 3 years now, and I still woke up some mornings expecting to hear her making coffee in the kitchen. Work helped. Caves didn't judge you for being quiet. They just were what they were. The drive to Cataract Falls took 40 minutes on winding mountain roads. No other traffic. Most folks avoided this area. Too remote, too wild. The Cherokee had always said this hollow was special, different. Looking back, maybe I should have listened. I parked at the trailhead and shouldered my pack. The path to the cave was overgrown, barely visible through the undergrowth. As I walked, I noticed something odd. No bird sounds, no insects buzzing. The forest was completely silent, like it was holding its breath. At the cave entrance, I found the first sign something was wrong. 8 Girl Scout badges arranged in a perfect circle on a flat rock. Not scattered like they'd fallen. Placed. Carefully. I picked one up. Troop 347, Jenny Morrison, was written on the back in blue ink. The cave mouth yawned in front of me, 20 feet wide and dark as a grave. My flashlight beam barely penetrated the darkness. I'd been in this cave dozens of times, but today it felt different. Colder. The air tasted metallic, like old pennies. I called into the darkness. "Hello? This is Ranger Whitmore. Can anyone hear me?" My voice echoed back, distorted. But underneath the echo, I thought I heard something else. Singing. Faint and far away. A children's song about campfires and marshmallows. I checked my radio. Static. The mountains played hell with radio signals, but I'd never had complete dead air before. Still, 8 little girls were down there somewhere, probably scared and cold, maybe hurt. I clipped my safety rope to a rock anchor and started into the cave. The main tunnel sloped down at a gentle angle, smooth limestone walls worn by centuries of water flow. My boots echoed on the stone floor. After 50 yards, the passage opened into Cathedral Chamber, a room the size of a church sanctuary, with formations that looked like organ pipes and altar wreaths. Ales. This was where tour groups usually stopped. Safe territory. But the children's footprints in the mud led deeper. "Girls," I called again. "Mrs. Henderson." This time I definitely heard singing. Multiple voices, young and high. But the sound came from 3 different directions at once, which was impossible. Sound didn't work that way in caves. It followed the passages, bounced off walls predictably. It didn't split into harmony with itself. I followed the clearest set of footprints. 8 pairs of small hiking boots heading down the left passage into what we called Devil's Throat, a narrow tunnel that dropped steeply into the cave system's deeper levels. No responsible adult would take children down there. The ceiling was low, the path treacherous. One slip and you'd tumble into darkness. But the prints were clear, fresh, made within the last day or 2. My flashlight started flickering. I tapped it against my palm, checked the batteries. Fresh ones, installed that morning. But the beam was growing weaker, taking on a yellow, sickly tinge. The compass on my belt was spinning in slow circles, needle unable to find magnetic north. "Equipment failure," I muttered. Limestone caves were full of iron deposits that could mess with compasses. And flashlights failed all the time. Still, both at once felt like bad luck. The tunnel narrowed. I had to duck, then crawl on hands and knees through a section called the Pinch. On the other side, the passage opened into Reflection Pool, a chamber with an underground lake perfectly still and black as ink. The children's prints went right to the water's edge and stopped. I knelt by the muddy shore, studying the ground with my failing light. The footprints were clear right up to the water, but there were no marks on the far shore. No signs the girls had swum across or found another way around. It was like they'd just vanished. Then I heard the radio crackle. 3 rangers from headquarters calling in. "Whitmore, this is Patterson. We're at the cave entrance, coming down to assist." Relief flooded through me. "Cows." "Hi, Patterson. I'm at Reflection Pool. No sign of the girls yet, but I've got tracks leading to the water. On our way, ETA 10 minutes. I waited, studying the dark water. The singing had stopped, but I could hear something else now. A sound like crying. Soft, heartbroken sobbing that seemed to come from the water itself. My grandmother's words echoed in my head. The women who cry in the caves. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. No sign of Patterson and his team. "Patterson, what's your status?" I called into the radio. Nothing but static. Then screaming. 3 male voices, shouting in terror and pain. The sound lasted maybe 10 seconds before cutting to dead silence. "Patterson! Patterson, respond!" Nothing. I was alone in the dark with 8 missing children, 3 missing rangers, and something in these caves that definitely wasn't supposed to be here. The sobbing from the water grew louder. I had 2 choices: go back to check on Patterson's team or keep following the children's trail. The trail was cold, but those girls had been missing longer. Every minute counted. I chose the girls. There was another passage leading away from Reflection Pool, one I'd only mapped partially. It dropped even deeper into the mountain, following an underground stream that disappeared into cracks too narrow for humans. But as I approached the entrance, I saw something impossible. More footprints. Fresh ones, leading into a tunnel that should have been impassable. The prints were small, children's hiking boots. But mixed in with them were others. Bare feet, narrow and long. Too long for human feet. They had what looked like claw marks instead of toes. My flashlight died completely. I fumbled for my backup, hands shaking now despite 19 years of cave rescue experience. The darkness in caves wasn't just absence of light. It was presence of something else. Weight pressing against your eyes, your chest, your sanity. The backup light flickered on, casting wild shadows on the limestone walls. And in those shadows, I saw her. A woman in a white dress, standing at the far end of the tunnel. Her hair hung long and black, covering her face. She was too tall, too thin, arms that reached nearly to her knees. When she turned toward my light, I saw why she was crying. She had no face, just smooth skin where features should be, except for a mouth that opened wider than any human mouth could. The sound that came out wasn't quite a scream, wasn't quite song. It was the sound of wind through broken glass, of water over drowning voices, of every mother who'd ever lost a child. I ran, back through the tunnel, stumbling over rocks, scraping my shoulders on the narrow walls. Behind me, the wailing grew louder, joined by other voices, a chorus of grief that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I reached Reflection Pool and didn't stop. Plunged into the black water, which was warm, too warm, like bath water, like blood. Something brushed against my legs, something with too many joints. On the far shore, I dragged myself out and kept running, following a passage I'd never seen before. The limestone walls were carved with symbols, spirals and figures that looked almost human but wrong in ways I couldn't name. Cherokee writing maybe, but older. Much older. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, bigger than anything I'd mapped. Hundreds of feet across, ceiling lost in darkness, and scattered across the floor like broken toys were pieces of equipment. Radios, flashlights, rope, first aid kits, Patterson's gear, but covered in something that looked like moss, like they'd been here for years instead of minutes. In the center of the chamber stood 3 figures, not the faceless woman from the tunnel. These had faces. Beautiful, Terrible faces, with eyes like deep water, and smiles that never reached those eyes. Cherokee women in traditional dress, but their clothes were made of mist and shadow, and their feet didn't quite touch the ground. The Nunahi are my grandmother's spirit people. One of them spoke, her voice like wind in autumn leaves. "Jacob Whitmore, son of the White Moor, we know you. We know your blood." Around the edges of the chamber I could see them now. Patterson and his men, but changed. Their skin had taken on the gray-white color of limestone. They moved slowly, like sleepwalkers, their eyes empty and old. Not dead, but not alive either. "The children," I managed to say. "Where are the 8 girls?" The center spirit smiled wider. "Safe, pure, protected from the poison above. They sing with us now, in the deep places where time moves like honey and pain cannot reach." She gestured to alcoves carved in the chamber walls. In each one a small figure sat cross-legged, perfectly still. The Girl Scouts, but like Patterson's men, they were changing. Their skin growing pale, their eyes taking on the deep, empty look of cave dwellers who'd forgotten what sunlight looked like. "Join them," the spirit said. "Your grandmother's blood calls to us. Be their guardian, as we guard all sacred things." Water began seeping into the chamber, not from the underground stream, from the walls themselves, weeping limestone tears. The spirits controlled the water, controlled the stone, controlled time itself in these deep places. I thought of Sarah, dead 3 years now. I thought of my grandmother's stories. I thought of 8 little girls who just wanted to see pretty cave formations. "No," I said. The wailing began again, louder now, coming from every direction. The water rose to my ankles, then my knees. But I remembered something else my grandmother had taught me. The old ways, the prayers, the offerings that showed respect instead of defiance. I pulled out my emergency tobacco pouch, Cherokee tradition, something I'd carried for luck but never used. Scattered it on the rising water while speaking words in my grandma's, others' language, words I'd forgotten I knew. The spirits stopped wailing. The water stopped rising. "We see your respect," the center spirit said. "We offer a choice. Take 4 of the children. Leave 4 to guard with us. Take your limestone men. But you must stay. The hollow needs a watcher with living blood. 4 lives for 4 lives. 4 children saved, 4 lost forever. And me, trapped in the dark for the rest of my very long life." The water was up to my chest now, warm and somehow alive. I could feel things moving in it, not fish, not anything natural. The spirits watched me with their deep eyes, waiting for my answer. Around the chamber, the transformed rangers stood like limestone statues, and the Girl Scouts sat in their alcoves, becoming something other than human. "Why these children?" I asked, buying time to think. "Why here? Why now?" The center spirit drifted closer, her feet never touching the water. "The world above grows sick. Poisoned air, poisoned water, poisoned hearts. We save what we can, the pure ones, the young ones, before the world breaks them." I looked at the girls in their alcoves. Jenny Morrison, whose badge I'd found at the cave entrance. 7 others, ages 8 to 12, according to the missing persons report. They looked peaceful, content, like they were dreaming beautiful dreams. But they were also disappearing, bit by bit, becoming part of the cave itself. "The Cherokee told stories about you," I said. "The Nunehai. Spirit people who helped hunters, who warned of danger. You were protectors, not kidnappers." The spirit's expression flickered. Something almost like sadness crossed her face. "We are what we have always been. But the world above has forgotten how to listen, how to respect, how to live without destroying. So we take what we can save." The water reached my neck. In another few minutes, I'd be swimming, then drowning. The spirits had all the time in the world. I had maybe 5 minutes to save 4 children and 3 rangers at the cost of everything I'd ever known. But then I heard something, that changed everything. Singing. Not the eerie, supernatural chorus I'd been hearing. Real singing. Off-key, scared, but human. Coming from one of the alcoves. Jenny Morrison, the girl whose badge I'd found. She was fighting the transformation, fighting the dream state the spirits had put her in. Her eyes met mine across the chamber, and I saw terror there. Real, human terror. She mouthed one word. Help. That decided it. I'll take your deal, I told the spirits. But I choose which 4 stay and which 4 go. The center spirit tilted her head. Choose then. I pointed to the 4 girls who looked most changed, whose transformations had progressed furthest. 2 of them were already more limestone than flesh, their eyes empty of human recognition. Better to save the ones who could still be saved. Those 4 stay, I said. The others come with me, and the rangers. The rangers are already ours, the spirit said. They cannot return to the world above, but we will honor the bargain for the children. She gestured, and the 4 least transformed girls stirred in their alcoves. Jenny Morrison and 3 others, their eyes clearing, fear and confusion replacing the dreamy emptiness. Run, I told them. Follow the water back to the entrance. Don't look back. Don't listen to anything you hear. Just run. They stumbled into the rising water, still dazed but moving. The spirits watched them go without interference. A deal was a deal, even with the Nunehi. And now, the center spirit said, you stay, forever. The water closed over my head. But as I sank into the warm darkness, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. The constant ache of losing Sarah faded away. The weight of responsibility, of always being strong enough to save everyone, lifted from my shoulders. The spirits weren't evil. They were just different. They saw time differently, saw life and death die men differently. In their eyes, transformation wasn't death. It was becoming something more than human. I felt my own change beginning. Not the limestone transformation like Patterson's men, but something else. Something that let me breathe water like air, that made the dark caves feel like home. I became the guardian of the hollow. The official report said 4 Girl Scouts drowned in an underground river when the cave system flooded. The other 4 were found at the entrance suffering from hypothermia and trauma-induced memory loss. They remembered getting lost, wandering in the dark, but nothing else. Rangers Patterson, Miller, and Thompson were listed as casualties of the same flood. Their bodies were never recovered. The cave system was sealed with concrete and steel, declared permanently unsafe for public access. Mrs. Henderson, the troop leader, had stayed at the entrance when the girls went exploring. She waited 3 days before hiking out for help. By the time the search and rescue teams arrived, there was nothing to find but 4 frightened children and a lot of questions with no good answers. The children recovered mostly. They grew up, got married, had families. But none of them ever went camping again. And sometimes, on quiet nights, neighbors reported hearing them humming songs that sounded older than the mountains themselves. I stayed in the hollow, as promised. Time moves differently here. The spirits weren't lying about that. Days feel like hours, years like seasons. I watch over the deep places, making sure the boundaries stay strong, that the world above and the world below don't bleed into each other too much. Sometimes hikers get lost in the fog and wander too close to the sealed cave. I guide them back to the main trails, appearing as just another ranger doing his job. They never remember my face clearly, but they remember feeling safe, feeling watched over. The 4 girls who stayed with the spirits adapted well. They're happy in their way. They sing in the deep chambers, their voices echoing through limestone halls. They guard the elder, deeper things that sleep further down in the mountain's heart, things that make the Nunahai look tame by comparison. Patterson and his men serve as sentries, their limestone bodies perfect for the work. They don't seem to mind. Pain and worry are human concerns. and they're beyond such things now. As for me, I age slowly, very slowly. It's been over 60 years since that October morning, but I look maybe 50. The spirits keep their guardians functional. I might have another century or two before I need to find a replacement. I think about Sarah sometimes. Wonder what she'd think of what I became. But the hurt is dulled now, softened by time and distance and the deep peace of the hollow. She's part of the world above, and I'm part of the world below. Maybe we'll meet again when both worlds end and something new begins. Until then, I do my job. I watch. I guard. I make sure the boundaries hold. And I listen for the crying in the caves, because it never really stops. The hollow still weeps for its lost children, its transformed guardians, its necessary sacrifices. The sound carries up through cracks in the rock, whispers through underground streams, echoes in wind through the mountain passes. If you ever find yourself hiking alone in the Smokies and you hear women crying in the distance, don't investigate. Turn around. Go back to the marked trails. Some mysteries are meant to stay buried. But if you do get lost, if the fog rolls in thick and you can't find your way, don't panic. Help might come in the form of a ranger who looks younger than he should, who knows trails that aren't on any map, who guides you safely back to civilization without asking for thanks. That'll be me, still doing my job, still keeping my promise. Stay safe out there, folks, and remember, some places are sacred for good reason. Respect the mountains, respect the stories, and always listen. And to your grandmother when she tells you about the spirits in the deep places, they're listening too.